Master Harrison Sterling did not just want labor. He wanted the soul of every person on the Briarwood estate. He gripped Carmen's arm with a ferocity that spoke of a man losing his grip on reality. He didn't see a woman. He saw a rebellion that needed to be extinguished. He hauled her toward the manor's shadow, his fingers digging into the soft skin of her wrist until she stumbled. Your husband. Luis thinks he can protect you, Harrison hissed, his voice a jagged blade in the quiet evening. He thinks his hard work buys your safety. He is mistaken tonight. He learns that I own what he loves. Carmen didn't scream. She didn't beg. She planted her feet into the Virginia clay, forcing Harrison to exert every ounce of his strength to move her. Her eyes, dark and piercing, never left his. You can chain my hands, Master Sterling, she whispered, her voice vibrating with a terrifying calm. But you cannot own a heart that despises you. Harrison laughed, a hollow, grating sound. He yanked her closer, his breath hot against her ear. Pride is a luxury for those with power, Carmen, and in this house, I am the only God you will ever know. He twisted her arm upward, a cruel motion designed to force a cry of pain instead. Carmen simply tightened her jaw. Her silence was a scream he couldn't quiet. Luis will find out, she said, her voice dropping to a register that made Harrison's smirk flicker. Louise will find out only what I decide to tell him. Harrison countered. He will find out that you were clumsy, that you tripped. He is a simple man. Carmen, he obeys the whip, and he obeys me. To him, you are a wife. To me, you are a lesson. He shoved her toward the heavy oak door of the manor's windowless pantry, a room known among the workers as the Dark Box. It was a place where light went to die and spirits were meant to crumble. He pushed her inside with a shove that sent her crashing against the stone shelves. You belong in the dark, Harrison growled, standing in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the last of the fading sun. You belong wherever I decide to put you, and tonight, you stay here until you remember who truly holds the keys to your life. Carmen stood up slowly, brushing the dust from her apron. She didn't look for an exit. She didn't look for a weapon. She looked directly at him, a small, knowing smile touching her lips, a smile that should have frozen Harrison's blood. The dark is a dangerous place for a man like you. Master, she said. Harrison scoffed, slamming the door shut and sliding the iron bolt. He walked away, feeling a sense of triumph he hadn't felt in years. He didn't realize that by locking her in that room, he hadn't trapped a victim. He had just handed the architect of his destruction the perfect place to build his coffin. Harrison Sterling paced the length of his grand library, the rhythmic thud of his boots on the Persian rug failing to quiet the sudden, irrational thrumming in his chest. He poured a glass of amber liquid, his hand shaking just enough for the crystal to clink against the decanter. He told himself it was the adrenaline of the conquest, the thrill of finally asserting dominance over Carmen, the woman who had looked at him with nothing but cold indifference for 3 years. But as he sat in his leather chair, a sound drifted through the floorboards, a sound that shouldn't have been there. It was a hum, low, steady, and vibrating with an ancient, melodic resonance. He set the glass down. The Dark Box was located directly beneath the library's foundation, a stone-walled pantry reinforced with thick timber. It was soundproof. It was a tomb, yet the humming persisted, vibrating through the soles of his feet. It wasn't a sound of distress. It was a sound of preparation. Harrison stood up, his face reddening. He had expected weeping. He had expected the frantic scratching of fingernails against wood. "Louise!" Harrison roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The door creaked open, and Louise, Carmen's husband, stepped in. His hat was in his hands, his head bowed, but his shoulders were tensed like a coiled spring. He had spent the last hour searching the quarters, his heart sinking with every empty room he found. He knew where she was. Everyone on the Briarwood estate knew when the master took someone to the manor at sunset. "You called." "Master?" Luce's voice was a low rumble, thick with suppressed emotion. Harrison leaned over his desk, pointing a finger at the floor. "Your wife is being disciplined. She lacks the proper respect for the hand that feeds her. You will go to the smokehouse and bring me the heavy chains, not the ones for the livestock, the ones for the stone shipments." Louise didn't move. He didn't look up. But his grip on his hat tightened until the felt began to tear. "Master, Carmen hasn't done anything to deserve the box. She's worked the kitchen since dawn. She has done exactly what I say she has done." Harrison screamed, slamming his palm onto the desk. The inkwell jumped. "And if you value your skin, you will do as you are told, or perhaps you'd like to join her in the dark. I hear the air gets quite thin after the second day." Louise looked up then. For a fleeting second, the subservience vanished, replaced by a gaze so lethal it made Harrison take an involuntary step back. But Louise knew the rules. He knew that a direct strike meant death, not just for him, but for her. He nodded once, turned, and walked out. Harrison sat back down, trying to regain his composure. He looked at the floor again. The humming had stopped. In its place was a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. He began to wonder if Carmen had found something in that room. He remembered his father mentioning that the pantry had been built over an old, forgotten well that had run dry a century ago. He stood up, driven by a sudden, frantic need to see her face, to see the fear he had failed to ignite earlier. He grabbed the heavy iron key from his belt and moved toward the hidden door behind the servants' stairs. As he reached for the bolt, he heard a whisper from the other side of the wood. It wasn't Carmen's voice. It was a chorus of voices, layered and overlapping, speaking a language he didn't recognize. His hand froze on the key. He was the master of Briarwood. He was the law. But as he stood in the flickering candlelight of the hallway, he realized that for the first time in his life, he was afraid to open a door in his own house. The hallway felt tighter, the shadows stretching like long, skeletal fingers toward Harrison's throat. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of fear. Ventriloquism, he told himself, a trick of the acoustics. She was a woman alone in a stone room. There were no other voices. He was Alastair Harrison Sterling, and he would not be mocked by a servant in his own basement. With a snarl of defiance, he shoved the heavy iron key into the lock. The mechanism groaned, a high-pitched metal-on-metal scream that seemed to echo into infinity. He slid the bolt back and threw the door open, bracing himself to see Carmen huddled in a corner, weeping and broken. But the dark box was empty. The candle in Harrison's hand flickered violently as he stepped into the small, rectangular room. The stone shelves were lined with jars of preserved peaches and salted meat, all undisturbed. There, dust on the floor was thick, but there were no footprints leading to a corner. There was only one set of tracks, Carmen's, and they led directly to the center of the room. Where they simply vanished, Carmen? Harrison's voice was no longer a command. It was a plea. He swung the candle around, the light dancing wildly. That's when he saw it in the center of the floor. A single stone slab had been moved. It was a heavy piece of granite, weighing at least 200 pounds. Yet it had been slid aside as if it were made of parchment. Beneath it lay the mouth of the old dry well. His father had warned him about a cold, damp draft billowed up from the hole, smelling of wet earth and something ancient, something that had been buried long before the foundations of Briarwood were ever laid. Harrison crept to the edge. Peering down, the well didn't look dry far below. He saw the faint, shimmering reflection of water, but it wasn't blue or clear. It was black as ink, and it seemed to pulse with a light of its own. "I told you, Master," a voice whispered. Harrison spun around, nearly dropping his candle. Carmen was standing right behind him. She hadn't been in a corner. She had been standing in the one place the light didn't reach, her back pressed against the door he had just opened. But she looked different. Her eyes weren't just dark anymore. They seemed to hold the same pulsing black light as the water in the well. "How did you move that stone?" Harrison gasped, his back hitting the cold pantry wall. "No woman, no 3 men could move that slab." "I didn't move it," Carmen said, taking a slow step toward him. "The house moved it. The land moved it. They've been waiting a long time to see you down here, Harrison. Away from your whips, away from your ledgers." Harrison reached for the door, but Carmen was faster. She didn't grab him with the strength of a woman. She moved with a blurred, unnatural speed. She slammed the door shut, and the iron bolt, the one Harrison had just unlocked, slid back into place on its own with a deafening clack. "Louise!" Harrison screamed, pounding on the oak. "Louise, help me!" From the other side of the door, there was no sound of running feet. There was only the low, steady humming he had heard earlier. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens. The entire house seemed to be breathing, the wood and stone groaning. In a symphony of liberation, Carmen leaned in close, her face inches from his. "Louise isn't coming. Harrison, he's outside with the others. They're watching the sun go down, and they're waiting for the scream that signals the end of the Sterlings." She pointed to the open well. "The water is rising, Master. Can you hear it? It's thirsty. It hasn't had a taste of a god in 100 years. Harrison looked down. The black water was no longer far below. It was bubbling at the rim of the well, spilling over the stone, cold and silent, beginning to coat the floor around his boots. The water didn't splash. It flowed like liquid shadow, thick and viscous, clinging to Harrison's leather boots with a weight that felt like iron shackles. It was unnaturally cold, a chill that bypassed the skin and bit straight into the bone. Harrison scrambled onto a low wooden crate, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard it felt like it would crack them. "What is this?" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "What devilry have you brought into my house?" Carmen stood in the center of the rising pool, the black liquid swirling around her ankles. Yet she didn't seem to feel the cold. She looked up at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the manor above. The fine crystal was rattling in the dining room. The heavy portraits of the Sterling ancestors were tilting on their hooks. The very history of the house was being shaken loose. "It's not devilry, Harrison," Carmen said, her voice echoing with a strange, metallic clarity. "It's memory. This Land remembers the blood you spilled to plant your tobacco. It remembers the mothers you sold and the fathers you broke. You thought you buried those secrets in the dark. You didn't realize the dark has a long memory. The water reached the top of the crate. Harrison lunged for the stone shelves, his fingers clawing at the jars of preserves. He knocked a jar of peaches to the floor. It shattered, the sweet syrup mixing with the bitter black ink of the well. He pulled himself up, hanging onto the shelving unit as it groaned under his weight. "I'll give you anything," Harrison pleaded, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "I'll give you your freedom. I'll give Louise the deed to the West Acreage. Just open the door. Let me out of this hole." Carmen tilted her head, watching him struggle. "Freedom isn't yours to give anymore. Master, you lost the right to grant it the moment you thought you could own it. Besides," she stepped closer. The water now waist deep on her, though she remained perfectly buoyant. "The door isn't locked because of me, it's locked because of them." She pointed to the wooden door. Harrison looked, and his breath hitched through the cracks in the oak. He didn't see the hallway. He saw eyes, dozens of glowing, amber eyes peering through the splinters. It wasn't Louise and the workers. It was something else, something that looked like men, but was made of the same shifting shadows. As the water, a rhythmic thumping began on the door. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of a heartbeat, slow and inevitable. "They've been trapped in this well for a century," Carmen whispered. "The original builders, the ones your grandfather disappeared when the manor was finished so he wouldn't have to pay them. They've been waiting for a sterling to come down into the dark. They've been waiting for the one who thought he was a god to realize he's just meat." The shelving unit gave a terrifying crack. Harrison felt the wood splintering beneath his grip. He looked down at the black water, which was now swirling into a violent vortex around the mouth of the well. The pressure in the room was immense, making his ears pop and his vision blur. "Carmen, please," he sobbed, the tears streaming down his face. She reached out, her hand gently touching the surface of the rising water. "Don't pray to me, Harrison. Pray to the dark. Maybe it's more merciful than you were." With a final, deafening snap, the shelves collapsed. Harrison plummeted into the freezing blackness, the water closing over his head with a sound like a tombstone being slid into place. Harrison Sterling surfaced with a gasp, his lungs burning as he swallowed the bitter metallic liquid. The pantry was no longer a room. It was a pressurized chamber of rising terror. The water was nearly at the ceiling now, leaving only a few inches of stagnant air near the rafters. Harrison clawed at the ceiling beams, his fingernails tearing against the rough-hewn timber as he fought to keep his nose above the surface. "Carmen." He sputtered, the word half drowned, looked for her, expecting to see her struggling, but Carmen was gone. In her place, the water itself seemed to take shape. The black liquid coalesced into silhouette slims made of shadow, faces with no features, but the amber glow of ancient, unforgiving eyes. These were the ghosts of the Foundation, the men whose bones lay crushed beneath the very house Harrison called his birthright. One of the shadows reached up, a cold, translucent hand wrapped around Harrison's ankle. It didn't pull with the jerk of a person. It pulled with the steady, gravitational force of the earth itself. "No, please," Harrison shrieked, his voice muffled by the water rising past his chin. The shadows began to pull him down, not toward the floor, but toward the open mouth of the well. As he was dragged beneath the surface, The physics of the room shifted under. The water, the dark box, expanded into a vast, underwater cathedral of stone. He could see the structural skeletons of the manor, the massive oak pillars that held up the library, the dining hall, and the master suite, but these pillars weren't resting on dirt. They were resting on the backs of hundreds of shadow figures chained to the bedrock. Harrison realized the horrifying truth. Briarwood wasn't a house built on land. It was a parasite feeding on the souls of the unrequited. Every luxury he had enjoyed, every fine wine he had sipped, was pressurized by the agony of those beneath him, and now the pressure was equalizing. His air was gone. His vision began to spark with white stars. Just as his consciousness started to slip, a hand gripped the collar of his shirt and yanked him upward. He broke the surface, coughing and retching, finding himself not in the pantry, but in a place that looked like the library, except the walls were made of moving water, and the books were blocks of solid ice. Carmen stood by the desk, which was a slab of raw granite. She wasn't wet. She wasn't afraid. She looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a dying insect. "You wanted to see how loud your thoughts become in the dark, Harrison," she said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "But you aren't in the dark anymore. You are in the truth. And the truth is that you never owned anything, not even your own name." She picked up a book from the desk as she opened it. The room vibrated with the sound of 1,000 screams, the ledger of every crime the Sterling family had ever committed. Harrison tried to crawl toward her, but his limbs felt like lead. "Look at the entry for tonight," Carmen commanded Harrison. Looked on the frozen page. A name was being written in real time, carved by an invisible blade. It wasn't his name. It was the name of the man he had mocked just hours before. Harrison stared at the frozen page, his eyes bulging as the invisible blade finished its work. The name carved into the ice wasn't Sterling. It was Louise beneath the name. A series of dates appeared, dates that predated the Sterling claim to Briarwood by nearly 50 years. What is this? Harrison wheezed, the cold from the floor seeping into his marrow. "Luis is a servant. He is nothing. My grandfather bought this land from the crown." "Your grandfather didn't buy this land," Carmen said, her voice dripping like melting ice. "He stole it from a man who couldn't defend it because he didn't have a piece of paper. But the land doesn't care about paper, Harrison. It cares about blood, and Louise carries the blood of the men who first cleared these forests, the men who bled into this soil before your family even knew what a Virginia was." The room began to dissolve. The water walls of the library collapsed, and Harrison felt himself falling again. But this time, he didn't fall into the well. He fell onto the hard, dry floor of his own study. The sun was gone, replaced by a pale, sickly moonlight that bled through the windows. He scrambled to his feet, gasping for air. Looking for Carmen, she was gone. The secret door to the dark box was closed, the iron bolt unmoved. He looked at his clothes. They were bone dry. His library was exactly as it should be. The decanter of amber liquid sat on the desk, undisturbed. "Dream," he whispered, his voice cracking with relief. "A fever dream brought on by the heat." He laughed, a hysterical, shaky sound, and reached for his drink. But as he lifted the glass, he froze. His reflection in the crystal wasn't his own. It was a distorted, gray-skinned version of himself, his eyes replaced by the amber glow of the shadows from The well then, he heard it thump, thump, thump. It wasn't coming from the cellar. It was coming from the front door of the manor. Harrison walked to the window, his heart hammering in a rhythm that matched the knocking outside. The entire enslaved population of Briarwood was standing on the lawn. They weren't holding torches. They weren't shouting. They were standing in perfect, terrifying silence, their faces illuminated by the moon. At the front of the crowd stood Luis. He wasn't wearing his tattered work hat. He was wearing a coat. Harrison recognized the heavy, velvet-lined coat of Harrison's own father, taken from the cedar chest in the attic. In his hand, Luis held the heavy iron key to the manor's front door. Luis! Harrison screamed through the glass, his fear returning with a vengeance. Get back to the quarters. I'll have you whipped for this. I'll have you sold. Luis didn't look up. He simply turned the key in the lock. The sound echoed through the house, a heavy, final thud that signaled the end of Harrison's sanctuary. Harrison backed away from the window. Stumbling toward his desk, he reached for the hidden drawer where he kept his pistol, but as his fingers brushed the wood, the drawer didn't open. It melted. The mahogany turned into soft, black mud, oozing over his hands like the water from the well. The front doors of the manor swung open. The sound of hundreds of bare feet stepping onto the polished hardwood floors filled the house. It wasn't the sound of a riot. It was the sound of a homecoming. Harrison scrambled backward, his hands coated in the cold, oily sludge of his own furniture. The manor, once his fortress of marble and fine timber, was beginning to weep. The wallpaper peeled away in long wet strips, revealing not brick, but the damp, packed earth of a grave. Every symbol of his wealth was dissolving. The silver tea service on the sideboard tarnished to black in seconds. The silk curtains rotted into cobwebs. The footsteps in the hall grew louder. They were heavy, deliberate, and carried the weight of 1,000 years of waiting. Harrison tried to scream, but his throat felt as though it were filled with the dry dust of the cellar. The library doors creaked open. Luis stepped into the room. He didn't look like a field hand anymore, standing in the moonlight. His presence was massive, his shadow stretching across the floor to touch Harrison's boots. Behind him stood Carmen, her white apron glowing like a shroud. You're in my chair. Harrison, Luis said. His voice wasn't the submissive mumble he had used for years. It was the voice of the land itself, deep, resonant, and final. This is my house. Harrison gasped, clutching the edges of the melting desk. I have the papers. I have the law. Louise stepped forward and placed a single, mud-stained parchment on the desk. It was the deed to Briarwood. As Harrison watched, the ink on the paper began to move. The name Sterling shriveled and disappeared, replaced by the deep, dark stains of blood that formed a different set of letters. The law is a ghost, Harrison, Luis whispered, and ghosts have a way of returning to the ones who made them. Suddenly, the floor beneath Harrison's feet began to soften. The expensive Persian rug turned into a whirlpool of black mire. He felt himself sinking first to his ankles, then to his knees. He clawed at the air, but the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old bones. Carmen, help me, he cried out, reaching toward her. Carmen didn't move. She stood beside Louise, her expression one of serene, terrifying justice. You asked me earlier why the dark was so dangerous for a man like you. Harrison, it's because the dark doesn't lie. It shows you exactly what you've built. Harrison looked around. The shadows from the well were no longer just in the basement. They were emerging from the walls, their amber eyes fixed on him. They weren't attacking. They were simply watching him return to the dirt they had been forced to till for him. "The audit is finished," Luis said, leaning down until his face was inches from Harrison's, "and your debt is overdue." The mud reached Harrison's chest. He felt the cold hands from the well reaching up to pull him the rest of the way. The house groaned one last time, a sound of timber snapping and stone grinding, as the entire manor seemed to collapse inward, not into a pile of rubble, but back into the hungry earth. Harrison Sterling did not fall. He was absorbed. The sensation wasn't of drowning in water, but of being swallowed by time. The mud didn't just coat his skin. It filled his pores, his ears, and his throat, tasting of centuries of bitter labor. Just as the black muck reached his lips, the world flipped. He gasped, his lungs burning, expecting the suffocating weight of the earth. Instead, he found himself standing in a void. There was no house, no library, no Louise. There was only a narrow circular stone platform suspended in a sea of absolute gray mist. Is it over?" Harrison whispered, his voice sounding thin and metallic. "It has only just begun." A voice echoed. It wasn't Louise or Carmen. It was a chorus, 1,000 voices speaking in unison. Vibrating the stone beneath his feet, figures began to emerge from the mist. They weren't the shadows from the well. They were the people Harrison had known his entire life. He saw the cook he had whipped for a burnt roast, the stable boy he had sold away from his mother, the elders he had worked until their hearts stopped in the July heat. They didn't attack. They simply stood at the edge of his stone platform and began to speak. They weren't shouting. They were reciting their lives. A woman spoke of the child she never got to hold. An old man spoke of the son he hadn't seen in 3 days, of the dark box. "Stop it," Harrison screamed, covering his ears. "I don't want to hear it." But the voices didn't come from the air. They came from inside his own mind. He was being forced to feel the weight of every moment of suffering he had inflicted. He felt the sting of the lash on his own back. He felt the hollow ache of hunger. He felt the crushing despair of being owned every time a voice finished its story. A piece of the stone platform beneath Harrison's feet crumbled into the mist. He stepped back, his heart racing as his world literally shrank with every sin he was forced to acknowledge. "I was only following the order of things." He shrieked at the fog. "I was the master. That was the law." "The order of things is changing, Harrison." Carmen's voice cut through the chorus. She appeared at the very edge of the mist, standing on nothing. "You spent your life building a house of cards on a foundation of pain. Now the wind is blowing." A massive gust of freezing air swept through the void. Harrison lunged for the center of the platform, but there was almost nothing left. He was standing on a single tile of stone, suspended over an infinite drop into the gray. He looked up and saw Louise wasn't a man anymore. He was a giant made of the very soil of Virginia, his eyes like twin suns. He reached down, his hand the size of a carriage, and picked Harrison up by his silk collar. "You wanted to know your place, Harrison," Louise roared, his voice shaking the foundations of the void. "Now you shall have it." Luce's massive hand tightened around Harrison, and for a heartbeat, the world went silent. The gray mist evaporated, and the gravity of the void reclaimed its prize, Harrison didn't fall back into the manor. He woke up on the cold, damp floor of the dark box. He scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The door was wide open. The morning sun was pouring into the hallway, blinding and sharp. He stumbled out, expecting to see the ruins of his house, but the manor was perfectly intact. The silk curtains were clean. The silver was polished. It was a dream, Harrison sobbed, falling against the wall. Just a nightmare. He hurried to the front windows, desperate to see his land and reaffirm his power. But as he looked out at the lawn, his heart stopped. There were number workers in the fields. There was no smoke rising from the quarters. The Briarwood estate was silent, abandoned, and overgrown with vines that looked decades old. He ran to the library and grabbed the ledger from his desk. He opened it to the last page, the one where he had seen the name Louise carved in ice. The page was blank, except for a single line of text in his own handwriting. "The master is a guest who overstayed his welcome." Harrison looked at his hands. They were no longer the hands of a young, powerful man. They were withered, spotted with age, and shaking with the tremors of a century. He ran to a mirror and let out a sound that wasn't a scream, it was a rattle. The face staring back at him was the face of the gray-skinned ghost he had seen in the crystal. He was the shadow in the well. He heard a voice from the porch. It was soft, melodic, and full of life. He dragged his frail body to the window in the distance. Beyond the rusted gates of the estate, he saw a thriving town. He saw people walking freely, their heads held high among them. He saw a man and a woman who looked exactly like Louise and Carmen, dressed in modern, fine clothing, laughing as they walked toward a sun that never seemed to set. They didn't look back at the manor to them. Briarwood was just a pile of cursed stones, a dark memory that had finally been forgotten. Harrison tried to shout for them, to beg for release, but no sound came out. He was tethered to the house. He was the foundation now. He was the ghost that had to stay behind to watch the world move on without him. He realized then that the dark room wasn't the pantry. It was his own heart, and as the sun began to set, the shadows from the well rose up from the floorboards one last time, not to punish him, but to sit with him in the silence of his eternal debt. Harrison Sterling, the man who thought he owned time, was now its only prisoner. He didn't pray for mercy anymore. He prayed for the end, but the land, just like its true people, was finally free, and it had no intention of letting him go.